Good evening. The City of Bothell Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, December 10th, 2014 will come to order. Let the record show all commissioners are present and accounted for except for Commissioner Gastineau, who is absent and excused. Do we have any non-agenda public comments? We have a number of members of the public here tonight. Hearing none, we have no minutes to approve this evening. I'm aware of no new business. We'll continue right to the continued public hearing of the 2015 Periodic Plan and Code Update. And this evening we'll have two items on our agenda, which is a third review of the Brickyard Road Subarea Plan, which we'll conduct initially, and then an initial review of the Country Village Lake Pleasant SR 527 Corridor Subarea Plan. So with that as an introduction, I will turn it over to our staff planner, Mr. Bruce Blackburn. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight on your dais, you've got exhibits BQ4 through 12, and the first four through 9 are exhibits that Ms. Colleen Hallett provided to us at the last hearing on November the 14th, I think it was, and exhibits 10 through 12 are exhibits I received in the last couple of days. And one of them, of course, is a letter from Mr. and Ms., Ms., she's right there, and some photographs. Exhibit number 11 is a bunch of photographs. I can't read my own writing there, I'm sorry. As well as, of course, a letter from the other person. So those are some new exhibits that I want to make sure and call your attention to. As we have identified, this is part of the 2015 periodic update of the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan. And this also involves two subareas. The first of all being the Brickyard Road Queensgate subarea, which is in the lower, basically southeast portion of the community. And the second item is the Country Village Lake Pleasant SR 527 subarea, which is kind of in the middle provision of the City of Bothell. Now, the subarea plans are where the city creates specific zoning designations, some specific character design provisions and things of that nature that basically refine the overall city plan, which is we call the citywide elements. Now, we've already conducted two reviews of the Brickyard Road Queensgate, and within that basically sub-area there are two property owner requests. One is from the Halletts and the other was from the Spetatian, Nelson, and O'Days. Now, the locations are within the Brickyard Road. The Hallett is in the northern portion of this sub-area, basically just right south of Woodinville Drive and west of Brickyard Road. And the Spetatian, Nelson, O'Day is basically at the northwest quadrant of the intersection of 160th Street and 124th Avenue. I'm going to start with the Hallett request. Essentially what this is a request that is located right next door to the Wine Valley Siding Facility and just north of the city shops. And again, it's on Woodinville Drive. Essentially what is happening here is that the property owners have requested the city downzone, if you would, these properties from its current general commercial designation to a residential, single-family residential provision. And this is due primarily to some tax burdens they're receiving from King County assessors. Apparently the King County assessor has increased their tax assessment on these properties, and it's really hurting the Halletts, and they'd like to have the provisions changed. And right now, of course, it is general commercial, which is a fairly intense land use designation within the city of Bothell. It actually does not allow detached single-family residential uses. However, because this is an established pre-existing use, it can go on in forever, basically underneath our non-conforming use provisions. Now, the request would change it from general commercial to R9600, and it would basically put it right in between the Wine Valley Siding and the city shops, as well as some lands basically just to the east of Interstate 405. Now, the staff recommendation is to retain the current general commercial designation, and that's kind of important because, in our minds, the switching over to a detached single-family residential use on this location would almost be like putting an incompatible use in between two existing provisions. And that's kind of backed up by the Bothell Municipal Code, which has a bunch of provisions that apply if you have a general commercial zone right next to a detached single-family zone. I'm just going to call your attention to a couple of those. One is that the Wine Valley Siding and the city shops as well would have to comply with a 50-foot setback, building setback from the Hallett property if that became an R9600 designation, as well as, of course, there'd be some additional landscape buffering provisions and some auditory controls, basically noise provisions, would be increased as far as the ability for Wine Valley Siding and the city shops to provide noise to the area. Now, we do have a land use basically code that basically identifies a policy that says we really shouldn't change the character of the existing neighborhoods and don't introduce incompatible uses. And in many cases, from our staff perspective and from a pure planning perspective, introducing a detached single-family residential use into this commercial area would be putting an incompatible use into this area. Even though it already exists, it would be basically for the city blessing that. So the proceedings for tonight would be for the commission to ask the staff any questions, take public testimony, and then if there's some questions generated from that, ask staff the questions. And then we would like to have you deliberate upon the request tonight if you can. And we have a recommended motion for you, and that is to adopt the staff findings, conclusions, and recommendation as Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations, which would be forwarded to the City Council when we pass the entire item to the City Council. The other item is, of course, is that if through your deliberations there's another provision or something else you want to do that's not consistent with the staff provision, that's fine as well. We will write whatever decision you decide to go for it. So that concludes my discussions about the Hallett request. Would you like me to go to the citation, or you want to just start right off with the Hallett provisions right now?
Thanks, Bruce. I think at this point, why don't we stay with this particular issue?
Okay.
And are there any initial questions of Mr. Blackburn on his presentation? Commissioner Clark.
Okay. Thank you. At the last meeting where this was discussed, we asked a question of staff, and I'm just trying to find it here, about this particular proposal. That was the question of whether each individual parcel could still be granted a residential building permit on these if they remain
Yes,
DC?
in fact, that's one of the things we actually looked at was there are 3 parcels, and all the 3 of the parcels, well, 2 of them have existing single-family houses on them. And basically, because this was a pre-existing lot of record, and that's kind of how the code discusses it, we could allow a single-family detached on the middle parcel, if you would. And that's the one that's currently vacant.
And also a reconstruction of a new homes on the currently built on parcels?
Absolutely. The city's non-conforming use and structure provisions are pretty liberal in that regard, that any time you have a structure that is destroyed by fire or accident or things of that nature, you can rebuild it to its pre-existing condition.
How does that get memorialized, I guess, on that parcel that's vacant now? How does that get memorialized that they will have the right to
well,
build
especially, that's one of the provisions that's right out of the code.
It is.
I mean, they're actually just, it's from our standpoint, it's pretty clear from what our direction is from that code provision.
Okay. Then I had just one more question based on something you just said, Bruce. You mentioned that the adjacent commercial uses would potentially be put at a detriment because of a setback issue, a 50-foot setback and that kind of thing. Is there any way to kind of perpetually grandfather those adjacent parcels so that they are not subject to that setback?
Not under the existing language of the nonconforming use statute. Essentially what happens is that even if this, even if this were to be destroyed, it wouldn't be able to use that nonconforming use provision because it's not basically a grandfathered use. So essentially what would happen is they have a storage shed, I guess you would, along this west property line. It's about 5-6 feet, something like that, from that west property line. They would, if it was destroyed more than 50%, have to relocate it consistent with the zoning provision of the setback.
And if they sold that property or redeveloped it, anybody that purchased it and redeveloped it would have to respect those setbacks as well?
If somebody purchased it they could again enjoy the use that's already there.
Right.
But if somebody were to redevelop the site, they would have to comply with the
Okay.
the 50-foot setback, particularly in a redevelopment situation.
I guess that concerns me because I think we don't want to. I understand we may want to grant something that helps somebody, but at the same time, if it's a detriment to somebody else, I have a concern with that. That's all I had.
Any other questions? Mr. Stahl?
So for both of those commercial properties, I noticed they're already adjacent to a residential. With the Hallett property, switching that over to residential, does that incur a new issue?
Well, actually, what happens is that because it's a current use, that's one thing, but it's the zoning designation that basically triggers those special setbacks. So the idea behind it is that if you're a general commercial zone next to a general commercial zone, and even if it's a single family, you don't have to comply with those additional setbacks. But if the single family is a single family zone, you do have to basically provide for those setbacks. It's the zoning change that would trigger those.
See, but for example, for the parcel south of the property, there's a R9600 to its west, and for the parcel to the east of it, there's a R2800 on the southern border. Do those so both of these commercials are already adjacent to a residential? Is it just that the setbacks in question are just not an issue on those borders?
Well, in this case, the southern parcel, this is the city shops right here. And you can see how far it is away from, this is the property line in blue. You can see how far away the structure is from those areas. And this is also a really steep hillside. And so the idea is that, yeah, the 50 feet ends up about here and about here. So it really doesn't affect the existing city shops that much. Or over in this area either, because there actually are no structures over here. There's a couple little small decant facilities, but there's no structures here. So that's really not an issue for the existing city operation. And, of course, the Wine Valley Siding, they have, again, the same situation here because it's a little bit more than 50 feet until you actually get to their property line. It's kind of hard to see that black line right there, but there is one.
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Stedman?
How are landowners notified when a property is rezoned?
Well, basically what the city does is we have a multiple methodology. Right now what we do is we basically send out notices to people as well as we put a little board or sign on the piece of property. In the past, we even were more aggressive. We actually, in a number of the recent plan and code amendments we've done, we've actually sent out notification through little postcards and things like to every address within the city of Bothell.
Okay, and then when this particular property was rezoned from R9600 to CG, is there any verification that the landowner was notified or?
That would take a very significant research to look into all of our old records. I will tell you that in 1992 and 1994, what happened was that was the city's first Growth Management Act plan. And essentially what happened is we did an incredible notification effort on that because it was a entirely new plan that was underneath a completely different statute of the state law. And so we sent a lot of notification out to people.
Okay. And when a landowner's property is rezoned, what is their recourse to have it unrezoned, if you will?
Well, this is one of them right here. Basically, they come to the city and say, look, we'd like to change the comprehensive plan and the zoning of our piece of property. That's the first recourse. After the 1994 adoption of the plan, that would have been a time they could have appealed that as well.
Right. One of the things that in reading through all the material, and I thank you for the material because it was quite complete, I have a little bit of a concern that there may be a conflict of interest because the city shop is directly adjacent to this particular property that the landowner is attempting to get rezoned. And so the city is saying, I don't want to rezone because in the event that there's a fire or the property is destroyed, then I have a different setback. So that's something I just want to find out if we've even thought about.
Yeah, actually, it's not a conflict of interest. And what it might be an appearance of fairness. And essentially what the situation is that this facility right here, the city has no short or long-term plans to change that facility. And essentially the situation was that the city's shops would have the same ability. If a non-conforming use, we could rebuild it to its existing non-conformity. So really, it's a very, very tiny chance the city would ever do anything to this facility here. We have our brand-new Public Works Operations Center that has more than enough capacity for us for the next, well, as long as we'll be around, that's for sure. But the idea behind that is that there's hardly no chance for the city ever doing anything to this piece of property.
Okay. And then my last comment, I guess, is I have a little bit of a concern when a property is rezoned unbeknownst to the landowner, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that
Sure.
they, lost the postcard or whatever, that results in financial damage, financial hardship to them, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, here we are, and we're rehashing that. So
Yeah.
I have some concern about that.
The thing that's interesting about this is that it was only, from what I can read from the Hallett's statements, and they probably can tell you better than I can, is that it was only since 2011 that they saw a really significant increase in their tax assessment. And honestly, I don't know what could have triggered that. And again, we're not the county assessors, and we don't have a pipeline to them, because the zoning was changed in 92, 94. So it's a little bit of a loss to us as well. And excuse me, one of the things that we've done is I have reached out to the Halletts and said, listen, we do help people who have what they believe is an unfair assessment, and we're willing to provide letters and information to the county so the county can understand how the city views the piece of property. And we've done that in the past. Sometimes it's been successful, sometimes it hasn't been. Mm-hmm. But it's a way for the county to see that, oh, okay, well, here's the city of Bothell saying that there are some severe restrictions on this piece of property, that maybe an assessment should be different or something like that. We're willing to help them all we can for that.
I think that'd be a fantastic step of good faith, if nothing else. The other question I have is, it looks on the information that you provided, Bruce, that I think an R5400D or R5400A zoning would actually have about the same tax implications as an R9600.
Yeah.
And hold on just for a second.
Okay.
The properties adjacent to are either R4000 mobile home park or R2800. So that might be a compromise that would work for all parties.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we were looking at is that when they first approached us, we said, well, what other use could we put here that would make sense? And most of them were in the multifamily type approach, which probably would be okay. We could make it work. We'd have a little bit of an issue with the setbacks. We'd have to make sure we work through that. But the big thing here is the fact that my concern is that may not really achieve what the Halletts were trying to go for, and that was really having a major reduction in their assessment. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but it looked as if that from that table that I found from the assessor's office, it said, oh boy, it looks like they're pretty similar in their per square foot assessment rate. And so I was a little bit nervous about doing that. Certainly staff is willing to take a look at even more, basically an R2800 or something like that designation. That would be probably an appropriate designation there as well.
Well, I think the R5400A, according to the table that's in here, R5400A would have the same tax implications as an R9600.
I think it does, yes.
Yeah. So that might be something worth looking at.
Sure.
Again, my overall concern is the fact that we have a landowner that has been negatively impacted without their knowledge, and here we are. We're fighting this battle 3, 4, 5 years later. We should have fought it 3, 4, 5 years ago, but we still need to fight it.
Commissioner Cabe.
Thanks for the information, Bruce. Just to follow up to last meeting and some of the information provided in the exhibit, seems like the Halletts are between a rock and a hard place where the site as it stands isn't economically viable for development as long as, there's some environmental issues, possibly some steep slopes. Can you speak to the viability of a commercial development going in that space as it currently exists?
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned over the past maybe even 10 years as a staff level is that there used a time when we were really nervous about tall retaining walls. A lot of that has gone away. We have a lot of really tall retaining walls throughout the city. We've got 30, 40, almost a 200-foot retaining wall by the basically UW South entrance. The technology and the engineering science behind those has really improved over the years. So it's not at all unusual to see a 30 or 40-foot tall rockery, not rockery, retaining structure, it's not a rockery, in those kind of things. One of the other things about the hazards provisions is that our map identifies areas of potential geologic hazards. Essentially what happens is that tells us that we need to have a geotechnical engineering assessment of that piece of property when we get a development. And a lot of times that geotechnical engineering assessment will go in and say, well, actually, I know you map this area as potentially geologically hazardous, but it's actually not. And we've had quite a few situations like that. Or we've had situations where we say, yeah, it does have the ability to be potentially geologically hazardous. We go through these special engineering techniques, and we can basically develop here safely and appropriately. So there's been a long ways we've gone in that area of the science and engineering for the past 10 years.
Okay, thanks. And I think that's my main hang-up is it seems like right now they're being taxed as if it's a flat, easily developable piece of property when in fact I think some of the value is diminished by what infrastructure would have to go in to bring that to an actual development. So I know we're not the county and we can't make those changes, but it just doesn't seem like it's evening out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you from a staff perspective, we are very sympathetic to the Halletts. This is a really tough row they're having to pull, and that's why we're more than willing to provide any technical and assistance we can if they go to the county and have the discussion. We've done this in the past, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but I'd like to think that our track record has been pretty good because the county is looking for an agency that can tell them really what the situation is that, you know, maybe has not quite so much the vested interest as the property owners. And we're perfectly willing to do that because I think you're correct. This does have some parameters to it that would increase the cost of development on the site that maybe is something that the county has not recognized.
Mr. Vliet.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Commissioner Stedman said. All of his comments, I'm in complete agreement with that, as well as some of the other commissioners. I guess my question also would be, if this were to be rezoned to general GC.
It's currently zoned general commercial. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So if it were to truly be developed GC, which it's zoned for now, instead of being basically what it is residential, even though it's zoned GC. Sorry about that.
That's right.
If it were to be, say, the Wine Valley supply, as it is so, I just feel like I've driven that road hundreds of times, as we probably all have, because it's a major arterial. Isn't that kind of a blind spot in the road and maybe not a good place for a GC designation?
I didn't do a traffic analysis, I'm sorry to say, but I can tell you that there's a relatively decent site distance from the eastern portion of the property. It's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but it's probably acceptable, and that would be something that a traffic engineer would actually do a pretty good analysis on. I've been to the site a few times, and there's a little favorite place I like to park, and then I pull out from there because I can see down the road quite a ways.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I have one question, and then we'll open it up to the public. There's nothing we're doing, or that the staff is recommending, that would cause the current house to have to be moved or changed or anything, correct?
No.
Right.
No.
We're just talking about the future development of
Right.
the property.
Yeah.
When we talk about the particular changing of a zoning designation, the tax implication on the property owner is one element that staff considers. What are some of the other things? And I've written down a couple here of just the strategic direction that Bothel's taking as a city, some of its specific land use policies. Take us through just kind of at a high level, maybe the key points staff takes into consideration when you're looking at a zoning designation and a potential change to it or not.
Right. Well, our primary guidance, of course, is our own comprehensive plan that tells us what areas are supposed to be. And essentially what has happened is over the years, there's been a lot of discussions about the comprehensive plan and what are appropriate land use designations, including the Hallett property. And for many years it's been, since the change in 92, 94, has been general commercial, and that has really not changed. One of the other elements we have to do is that there's a lot of things we take into this, including our target capacities. Now, the City of Bothell has a population capacity we have to meet, and we have an employment capacity we have to meet. Now, right now, as the Commission knows, we have a deficit in our population capacity for Snohomish County portion of the city. We don't have an issue with employment. And so the idea behind that is that our employment, we have a surplus, and that's mostly because of the big business parks we have within our city. So we don't have to worry too much about that, but it's still something that we take into consideration. The other thing we take into consideration is just good planning practices, and that's basically the situation that, what is a good land use for this piece of property? Is it single family? Is it commercial? Is it something else? And from that standpoint, it's our belief that the best land use designation is a general commercial. Even with the limitations this property has, we still believe there's viability in having that general commercial use right next door to another general commercial use, what's basically on a fairly significant arterial street. It's actually a collector arterial street, as well as the things that are happening to the east of it. And that's actually not in the city of Bothell, but we have a lot of warehousing, light industrial, a lot of wine-type businesses. So all those things coming together indicate that this area really is not appropriate for detached single-family residences, which basically what the Hallets have to really see an impact to their tax assessment. So those are some of the big picture items that we have to apply when we take a look at a piece of property.
Great, thank you. So I think at this point, Bruce, we'll open it up to the public, and we'll call you back up if we need you during our deliberations.
Yeah. Thank you.
So at this point, this is an opportunity for any members of the public to come and speak. And if you would like to, please come forward and give your name and address. And then if you could limit your comments to 5 minutes, we would appreciate it.
My name is Colleen Hallett. My address is 11807 Woodinville Drive. It is my property that we are discussing. I'm not as well organized this time because I said pretty much everything I had to say at the last meeting, but I did want to address a couple of items that Bruce has brought up. I do want to reiterate there was no notice of the zoning change back in '92 when this happened. And I would like to ask Bruce what year they did change the zoning so that someone could build a residence on general commercial, because in 1978 you could not build a residence on a general commercial piece of property.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Thank you. Basically what that is, that's the, in 1978, and as we're talking really a different animal in this situation, there was not the same non-conforming use provisions we have now. We did a major change to that title in about 1994 or 5 or something like that to respond to some of the things that were happening when we did this big comprehensive plan change. And we made that a fairly liberal, basically inclusive provision that would allow them to do that. And we took a look at that and said, boy, it was a legal lot of record prior to that zoning change. It looks as if they could do detached single family. And I'm willing to give them a letter or something like that if they would like to have that.
Okay. That was just basically one of the reasons why we had the rezoning done in 1978. As far as, and Bruce has written us a letter and has, offered to write a letter to the tax assessor, and we, 2 years ago, I went and tried to fight it and was unsuccessful. I then, just this past year, I don't know if you guys are aware of the Harley Hoppe firm, and that is what they do. They basically take property owners and fight them for them, in a legal manner against the King County Assessor's Office. And I, sent them all my information, and they actually came back and told me that, no, I did not have a fight against the assessor's office based on the assessor's like properties and what they had used for the assessment. So obviously if I'm not successful here, I will take Bruce up on his offer and try. But I've already made 2 attempts, and it was not successful. The other thing that I wanted to just kind of point out was that when Bruce was talking about the setbacks, he mentioned that for the city of Bothell there would be no implications of a setback because the city of Bothell had absolutely no plans to develop that property anymore. So I don't know why that would be something that would be considered against us rezoning because of them trying to develop their property, since evidently they don't have any plans to develop that. As far as the Wine Valley Sidings property, the building that he is referring to is down below our property. All we see is its roof. So it is not anything that even impacts our property because we're that much higher up than they are on the hill. In 1978, when the 11715, we built a house on that property for my father-in-law who was blind. We did have to have a geotechnical engineer come out because it was a hazardous slope area. The foundation for that house had to be designed based on their findings. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say was I felt that some of the comments were that it would not be wanted to be changed back to residential because it would be impacting somewhere down the road setbacks for general commercial property. And I felt that my property was implemented when they decided to change it in 1992. And so I'm not quite sure why they would have any more. That would be more of an impact than what it's been on us as well. So thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Before you go,
question?
yeah,
All right, sorry.
Can I ask a quick question of you? Yes. Do you have a recent appraisal or a broker's opinion of value or anything of your property? Because you might be able to fight the assessor's value based upon the actual value of your property as well.
I don't know. I don't have a real estate appraiser's value of it. No, we haven't, because obviously we're not interested in selling. So no, we've not gone and got that.
The reason I say this is because if the assessor is looking at the neighborhood the neighbor property and comparing yours with a GC zoning, then that could be why you're being impacted as you are.
Well, to be honest with you, one of the properties that they mentioned was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with one block off of Kenmore, right behind the Safeway area there. There's a flat piece of property on that land. That was one of the properties that they compared our property to.
Right.
And when I fought that, they still said that was a reasonable like property. So I don't understand their reasoning down at the assessor's office.
Okay.
That's a different jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Chairman Booth, could I add one?
Yeah,
comment to
Commissioner
that?
Clark.
Sorry, could you just come back up for a second? I certainly understand your plight, and I, like Mr. Stedman, would like to make my comment on that, and that is that if you have a steep slope behind your house, and one way you may go about this, and I'm not sure, just throwing out an idea, is that if a geotech came out there and said that a good portion of the site was unbuildable for some reason, and typically that would be some sort of instability on the hill, and then they would put a buffer at the toe of the slope on that of some kind, usually anywhere between 25 and 75 feet or something like that. If you had a professional engineer had made a statement like that, I think that might be a pretty strong argument for you to have your property, to have the property value adjusted. I'm just throwing that out there, but I understand your plight. I think that if you haven't tried that, if you haven't spoken to a geotechnical engineer specifically about that, you might want to do that, and just you could petition, and you might even be able to potentially put that slope into some sort of preservation easement or something like that. And I think I've heard in the past that when people are able to do that, when they set it aside so that it can't be developed in the future, that makes a difference to the assessor too. So those are just a couple ideas, but you may want to consider.
And I'm not going to say that it wouldn't. I could. I just, like I said, when I even brought it up to the Hoppy organization that we were in a hazardous slope area and it was a very steep hill, and they went back and looked at it for a second time, and they said they didn't feel that, of course, they only take cases they think they can win, but they said I would be wasting my money because they didn't think they could beat it on that case.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to come forward and speak to this issue? I know there are others on the agenda. Okay, hearing none. At this point, what I'd like us to do is kind of amongst the planning commissioners, I'd like to hear actually from each one of us in terms of just your thinking on this, and then we'll make a decision on the staff motion, or recommended motion on this particular request. So I don't know if anybody would like to go first or not, but I'd like to really hear from each one of you just in terms of what your thinking is, and so I'll leave it up to volunteers, or I'll call on you.
Sure, I can go.
Commissioner Stahl.
Yeah, my thinking on this, I'm inclined to actually rezone it per the request, and a few of the things that I'm thinking of is functionally this is operating as a residential. It's not going to change anytime soon, and in one sense the zoning is a little bit artificial in that sense, but at the same time it has a very practical impact on one of our residents' lives, and I think that's important. I realize there's some implication to the neighboring ones, but those implications seem like they can be mitigated through grandfather clauses, or we've been around that track before. So that's where I'm standing on
All
it.
right. Thank you. Mr. Cabe.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. Doesn't sound like it's going to change use anytime soon. I am a little concerned about potential setbacks or noise considerations that Wine Valley Siding might have to take on as a result of this change. But since their shed is already established, it sounded like Bruce wouldn't have to do anything with the setbacks, but as far as landscaping, that might still be something that they'd have to look at if the use changed.
Yeah, to provide some clarification on what I previously identified, essentially what would happen is that if their shed was destroyed more than 50%, then they would have to comply with the setbacks and those things. If it does not destroy it or they don't make any other changes, it can stay exactly where it is for basically forever.
Okay. Yeah, as the Howletts have tried unsuccessfully to get this changed with the county and they're facing a large financial burden, I think a rezone would make sense in this case.
Mr. Stedman.
I think of it more as an unzone as opposed to a rezone, personally. One of the issues that came up in the reading is whether or not this would be what's called spot zoning, I think. And spot zoning, as I understand it, let's see, legal recourse for spot zoning whereby a small parcel or parcels of land are rezoned differently than the surrounding parcels for the benefit of the landowner. General test for spot zoning is whether or not the rezone is arbitrary. And in this case, I don't see that as being arbitrary. I see that as basically unzoning, if you will, or downzoning to what it was before. What I would suggest, Bruce, on page BR6 of your package there, on item number 4, the very last sentence, it says this designation reflects current and proposed uses. The current use is really single-family home, R9600. So we might want to adjust that. But what I would suggest we do is, and again, my vote is that we have it rezoned back to R9600. But in the last sentence, or the second to last sentence in number 5 there, it says, if in the future the owner of the this is in reference to the mobile home park, desires to redevelop, the plan designation for the property in question should be revisited to determine the appropriate land use in the context of the overall character. So I think if we put that, if we memorialize that in this, I'd be very comfortable with suggesting that we rezone it.
Mr. Clark.
I, in a lot of ways, agree with those 3 other commissioners' opinions. It's a difficult situation. The thing that concerns me, again, is that we do something that puts another property owner at a detriment. I don't have any way to know how much that impacts that Wine Valley Siding property, which I think we're pretty sure is the only property that would probably potentially be negatively impact. But I think if we were going to think about making a decision to rezone the property, I think we should get some more information about the property value impact on the Wine Valley Siding. We had Tony Paracchini was here at the November 19th meeting. He's the owner of Wine Valley Siding, and he did state his concerns about, I think he mainly talked about noise creation. But I think, you've got to look at both sides of the issue, regardless of whether that building that would violate the setback is burned down or removed or anything in the near future. It will have an immediate negative impact on the property value of that property, because a good chunk of it will be undevelopable as a commercial property. I don't know the dimensions along the road to know what percentage of the total frontage 50 feet is, but I got to believe it's probably pretty significant. So I'm inclined to not recommend the rezone unless two things happen. One, we find out, we get more information that indicates that the property value of the Wine Valley Siding property would not deteriorate, and secondly, that we could get or we get some assurance from staff that property could be grandfathered perpetually to the current setbacks and the current noise issues and that kind of thing, because this is a conscious decision being made by this property owner that proposed the Hallets to do this. So they're kind of putting themselves in the position and their own property in the position of having the setback issue, having the noise issue. So I think it would be appropriate that they would agree that they would somehow that we would put it together that the Wine Valley Siding property is not harmed in that way.
Commissioner Vliet.
Yeah. Those were some very good comments made by Commissioner Clark with regards to the possible future losses to the Wine Valley Supply Lumberyard. The Howlett's property is probably one of the most impressive homes that I've come across in the Bothell area. Due to its historic value, it's been a historical residence for forever, and while it's maybe not a historical home on the register, on the official register, I guess I feel like I would be in favor of the rezoning to a 9600 designation, partially due to the fact that it's been residential for so long. It's been general commercial for, almost 20 years, still residential in nature. I know there hasn't been a transportation assessment done on it, but I feel a little uncomfortable having driven that curve a lot of times, thinking about more than 2 or 3 residences of traffic going in and out of there, possibly big rigs. So I feel like the Wine Valley Supply is a little further set back from 405, so that's not as much of a concern for me. But I also, in my, my consideration of the 9600 rezone, I do also understand the possible implications, and maybe there can be something put into this so that the Wine Valley Supply, should that building burn down, for them to be able to rebuild the same structure in the same place without the setback designations. I don't know if that's possible.
Thank you. Well, I think these are all very, very good comments. And the only ones that I would add is that I'm very sympathetic to the tax implications of what the Hallets have gone through over the last few years. I'm also mindful of the strategic direction for the city and what the best future use for this particular parcel is. And so I'm inclined to actually accept the staff recommendation of keeping the GC designation for those reasons, as well as some of the others given here. But I think what I'm hearing is that we've got a little bit of a impasse, if you will. And I guess one question I'd have for you, Bruce, if we made if the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, that recommendation will still go forward to the City Council. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. Excuse me. That is correct, yes. It goes to the City Council for final action.
Okay. Well, I think that I would like to hear a motion, either in favor of, Commissioner Cabe.
Sorry, one last question. Following up on Commissioner Clark's comments, is there any way to memorialize the lack of having to have a boundary established? Because I understand it can be rebuilt with a fire, but like you mentioned, if they just wanted to sell it, they will be impacted greatly on the net usable area on that site.
Yeah, that's one I'd have to untangle. Probably what you're looking at is you're probably looking at a special regulation within the subject district, basically regulation zoning code provisions that would have some type of an exemption for this location. And I'm just thinking out loud real quickly. The idea would be that if you're in motion, your motion is look and staff direct to create a special non-conforming use provision for the Wine Valley siding, thus that they don't have to comply with the, well, we can't, well, it'd be the buffering and the setbacks. We can't change the noise provisions because that's a state law provision. We have to stay with that. But if that would be included in your motion, then I'd work on making sure that occurred.
Do we want to include that in a motion, or do we want to actually get additional information from staff with regards to keeping that grandfathering in, if you will, that non-conforming use?
Well, I mean, it'd be part of your motion. Okay, and that's what I would go forth and create for you guys.
All right.
Quick question on that.
Commissioner Stedman.
Would a cross-parcel easement solve that issue?
Part of the problem with easements is that it requires property owners to get together and do that. And certainly that would take care of it if there was some kind of an easement. I don't know how close the Hallett's existing house is to that eastern property line. It's I don't have a measurement on it. And I'd want to make sure it was more 50. It's 50 feet or more. That'd be.
Well, I'm just wondering if we got the two neighbors to agree, and there's a recorded document that travels with the land.
Oh, yes.
That,
yeah. And that would be one way to do it.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Absent a code change.
Right.
Mr. Clark.
Commissioner Booth, I'm not sure if this would need to be a motion or not, but I would propose that we return this to staff and gather some additional information about the impacts. I think that would also, to be fair, would give the Wine Valley siding owners the opportunity to comment further on this. I'm not sure why they're not here tonight. Maybe they probably thought that this was going to be a no-brainer, so to speak, and obviously it's not. And I'm wondering if we could make a specific direction to staff to do some additional research, perhaps what Mr. Stedman's saying, but also, some special, I think you said non-conforming use.
Yeah, it'd be a non-conforming use provision that you put into
yeah.
that particular sub-district regulations.
And I would be absolutely inclined to support the Hallett's proposal if we could do something to be certain that the neighboring property isn't impacted and that the owner of that property is on board with that.
Well, then I think what I'd like to do, rather than take a motion to this evening, is direct you to go back and do a little bit of additional research into specifically Commissioner Clark's request, and that is with regards to the impact on the neighboring parcel of making a change or not.
Right.
And
absolutely.
so I don't think we're ready to make a motion on this at this point.
Well, I just want to get clarification. Would Commissioner Stedman's suggestion of a easement
That would be
address that?
one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that at least gives us one known solution that we know makes all parties involved happy, that seems like it would be enough information to move
It's
ahead.
something that staff could certainly come back with as a potential. Sure. Okay. So we are not ready to make a recommendation on this evening.
Okay, so
All right.
basically what I will do is I'll come back with that analysis for you at the next hearing when we schedule this for. I don't actually have a date, but it'll probably be January 14th is probably the closest we could maybe do this. Again, I think I've got most of the folks' email addresses, and I'll make sure and let them know when we actually have this scheduled. But I'm guessing it's probably January 14th.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. I don't think we need to do anything further on that.
No,
this
thank you very
evening.
much.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank you.
that. Right.
All right, now let's move forward with the other request, and this would be the Spatian request.
This, of course, is located on the northwest quadrant of the intersection of 160th and 124th Avenue. And essentially what you can do is from this documentation as well as some of the other provisions, including this aerial photo, you can see it's primarily surrounded by R7200 designations, even R9600. To the south, it's a school and a water tank, and to the east, of course, which is the city of Woodinville, it's an R6 designation, which has got an equivalency to an R7200 designation from the city of Bothell. Essentially, what we have is that right now the property is zoned R5400D, or detached, and that basically is a single-family residential designation that requires a certain lot size, 5,400 square feet, and a certain lot dimension of 50 feet has to be within a circle of that size, has to fit within each of the lots. It doesn't have a lot of flexibility in that. That's basically what you have to do unless you go through a protracted planned unit development provision or something like that. One of the things about this particular property is they have a lot of issues, one of which is there is an existing basically major power line over here that's, really got some provisions on it. It's in the easement, so basically you can't build within that. You have to have only things like, driveways and things of that nature. As well as, of course, there's some other provisions. Essentially what staff is proposing is that we assign it, instead of an R4000, which is what the applicants are actually seeking, we go with an R5400A. Now, the R5400A gives people more flexibility. It allows you to use private drives that can be counted toward your unit count. It allows you to have flexibility in the lot size and things of that nature, so you can kind of cluster the site away from those power lines and build it upon the area that makes the most sense, which is kind of in this, the kind of the middle part of the property. And that's the reason we're proposing that. One of the things about the R5400A is it has a 30-foot height limit for buildings. The R4000 has a 35-foot, so there's a little bit of an issue there. And within the city of Bothell to date, all the development that's happened within the R5400A has been detached single-family residential condominiums. We haven't had any attached units. Apparently the market forces are such that makes the most sense, and that's what people are building within this designation really quite successfully. We have almost 500 of these type of units within the city right now. One of the things that happened at the last hearing was there was a lot of discussion about the surface runoff and how that might affect some of the downstream properties. Because to the west, there's a lot of downstream properties, and we heard from testimony they're getting a lot of water issues. The hydrology there is really tough for them. And I kind of wanted to go back and do a little bit of discussion about what happens there. And essentially, within a pre-development condition, which is kind of what they are, but they've got some modest development on the site. Most of the water from precipitation goes into groundwater and some surface and some is captured on the site. In a developed situation, the groundwater is decreased quite substantially, but the surface water, the stuff that falls in the rain and hits the hard surfaces, is increased. Now, one of the things that we have the advantage of today that we didn't have even 5 years ago is that we have adopted the 2005 Washington State Department of Ecology Surface Water Manual that requires that people model their properties under these certain conditions, and that is pretending as if the entire site is in a forested condition. And what that means is that when the precipitation hits the site, it has to be retained within a big vault or a big pond or something like that and released at a very controlled rate through a very small aperture that can only match what could be from a forested condition. It really has changed the game, if you would, on how this surface water thing is provisioned. I believe underneath these new provisions that most of the surface water issues are taken care of. The issue, the wild card, is groundwater. And I know that some of the things that are happening is it might be some groundwater coming up in some of those areas. That's one that's really tough for us to understand because it is such an interesting dynamic. It's under this area. Groundwater can run for many miles from its source. Essentially what you have is, and this little graphic is basically when they did the Brightwater and they were doing all those deep borings, they had all these groundwater areas. And you can see the groundwater areas, and this is a scale of, this is Little Bear Creek over in Woodinville, and this is North Creek over in the city of Bothell. You can see all these layers of groundwater that are moving downslope and all that stuff. It's a lot harder to work, and I'm concerned that some of the provisions that the neighbors to the south are suffering is groundwater. I believe that with these new surface water provisions, even if you have development on a piece of property, there can be more control than there is now. But the groundwater I'm concerned about, because it's just one of those wild cards that we always deal with all the time. And we have a lot of situations, you know, the neighboring properties are not alone. We've got water issues all over the place. But that's basically I just want to kind of identify that so everybody understood that surface water is something that is generally controlled fairly well. It's the groundwater that gives us a lot of problems. And again, just the same procedures we followed before. If you have any questions of staff, take some public testimony and deliberate, and then, either, consider the staff recommended motion, or again, as we did last time, you guys come up with your own motion. So those are all really good. So I'd answer any questions you may have, or take some questions, or go public testimony. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Any questions of Mr. Blackburn? Mr. Stedman?
Rough numbers. If a developer were to develop all those parcels, those 4 or 5 parcels, with an R4000 designation versus an R54A, how many units? What's the delta in units? Roughly?
I think what I did is I think my capacity analysis was about 21 units underneath an R4000 designation, about 15 units underneath an R5400A designation. So about 7 more units.
Okay. Thank you.
6 to 7.
Any other questions? Commissioner Clark.
Thanks for that. Thanks. Appreciate that presentation. It seems to me that sorry about that. It seems to me that the applicant's request and what you're recommending is kind of between where it is now and what they would have liked. So in that way, it seems to me that they're already compromising a little bit on this. Their building height, density, that kind of thing is a little bit different. Not that necessarily matters, but I just wanted to point that out, that this is not 100% what the applicant asked for. I have a question for you about the R5400A. They are not restricted to building attached product on that.
That is entirely correct. They could do townhouses or some other type of attached product.
Yeah, I've seen on the R5400A before, like a detached condo type project. I know there's one in Bothell up on North Creek, north of the commercial center there, that was fairly creative in how it used the ground, and it's a condo, but it's all detached. It almost appears to be a single family neighborhood, but it took advantage of the fact that you could kind of cluster the buildings into the area that made sense. So I suppose that's one option for the property that might be more appealing to the neighbors. I want to point out and reinforce, I guess, or maybe ask the question. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the stormwater situation actually might improve as a result of a development. Is that correct?
I think it could. I think basically what happens now is that there probably is not any type of a specific stormwater flow control. That's basically what the terminology is on the piece of property right now. Well, I'm sure it's not. So essentially what's happened is that whatever is going on to that property and its existing surface water flow coefficient, that's what they talk about, roofs and grass and those kind of things, is not controlled. And in the future, if it was developed, there would be controls placed upon that feature of the project.
And that control would be, if I was reading correctly, it would be to a higher standard than the property currently. Is the property forested now, or is it?
No, it is not. It's in it's in kind of a scrub shrub condition. There's some existing single family and.
So I think that it sounds to me like it actually might improve the situation if it's held to a higher standard, if it's allowed to release water at a rate lower than maybe it is now, and have the flow control, whether through detention or whatever. It seems to me that might actually be a benefit to some of these neighbors.
Yes, in fact, one of the other things that's required, and I didn't really mention this too much, is there's a technical report required, and that basically would be an assessment of the existing surface water drainage facilities to make sure that any water that was released from the site would not overtax those facilities. And that's one of the real key things that we do, because we've had a lot of situations where we had a development that was going to go in, and they actually had to go in and retrofit a lot of the existing stormwater pipes to make them larger so it would accommodate that. So it in many cases, it has improved the condition.
And if there were a flow onto an adjacent property that was not approved, an existing flow, would the engineering review of any proposal take that into account and maybe say, well, you need to right this wrong? If is that true?
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that's what the downstream analysis, the TIR report does. It's really supposed to take a look at those things. And one of the other features that we do is that whenever there's a development application submitted, and that's when the real big guys, the engineers and from the city and from the developer goes in and really takes a good look at the price of property.
Okay.
And that's also a time when we say, hey, we got some neighbors that have identified that this is a concern. I'm sure we've got it on record someplace. And we can say, oh, wait a minute, you got this or this or this issue, and we need to address those type of situations.
And then one last question. You drew a distinction between stormwater and groundwater. Is it likely that whatever you do on the surface is going to impact groundwater one way or the other? I mean, it seems to me it's kind of is what it is, and it's all going on below ground, so what's your thought on that?
The science generally says that when you have a developed condition, you're reducing the amount of precipitation that's getting to the groundwater, which can be a bad thing or a good thing. But generally what we find is that we have a lot of situations where there's a little stream or a little spring someplace, and it just can't be controlled no matter what you do surface water-wise. That's the real wild card that makes everything really tough.
Is it unlikely that it would increase the groundwater issue?
Very unlikely, yeah.
Okay.
Usually it does not increase it, but their groundwater may be coming from 20 or 30 miles away.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Cabe.
Just want to follow up on Commissioner Stedman's question. So in our packet, we've got 15 lots under the 5400D.
Yeah, and one of the things that was unfortunate is that when we do a capacity analysis, we don't take into account things that are on the piece of property like this easement and all those things. So honestly, it's going to be less than that, honestly. And I don't want to, because I didn't do a full analysis from a design standpoint, but it would be much less than 15.
Okay, so if we have 5400D where they have to have individual accesses to the main road, we're talking somewhere maybe half that, maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, anywhere between 7 and 10 if you got really, really artful with your lot configurations.
Okay, and then 15 switching to A, and 21 if it were.
Yeah, again, with the
applicant's
A,
request.
there's no guarantee you get 15
Right.
because they may run into something that I'm not aware of, but it gives them more flexibility to get a higher number than you would with the under 5400D.
Okay.
But it won't approach what King County probably allowed.
And just to reiterate, the main flexibility with your site design, if we were to go to 5400A, to where you can cluster where it makes sense as opposed to just have the minimum 5,400 square foot lot. So-
Right, exactly. And that's what the A does that the 5400D does not.
Commissioner Stedman.
Bruce, what's a ballpark number of units that could have been built before the properties were annexed?
I don't know that. I know that the property owners are going to provide you some information on it, but I rarely like to delve into another jurisdiction's regulations and make a prediction on what that might be. Usually because there's so many nuances about the regulations that you just really can't do it from the reading. I'm sure it is much more than what they would be allowed to get underneath a 5400A even designation, because King County has a lot of provisions they allow that have some incentives to it, allows increased density as well, that the city of Buffalo does not.
I mean, I'm concerned that we annex some parcels in, and all of a sudden it's, got some great news for you. You're now part of the city of Bothell. Oh, by the way, you can only build half of what you thought you could build. That could be problematic, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's half.
Well, I mean, whatever the number is. That's why.
And now, when we first did the annexation, we were looking at that. We were coming up with about a 20% figure.
Okay.
Is what we were seeing, the difference between their equivalent provision and our equivalent provision. The thing that was hard to predict is when King County gives you an incentive for, providing some recreation space or something like that.
Right.
That's the one that we could not get into very well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Bruce, at this point, we'd like to open this up to the public, and So you can have a seat. We'll ask questions of you if we need you and during our deliberations. So I'll turn to any members of the public, or any of you that here in the room that would like to speak to this issue. Yes, sir. Come forward. And just, again, state your name and address, and if you could keep your comments to 5 minutes, we would appreciate it.
Oh, not a problem. My name is Ken Straub, 16106, 122nd Place Northeast, Bothell. I'm the guy that's directly downstream from where these houses are going to be. And I welcomed the comment that Bruce made in his opening remarks on the other property. One of the things that you guys are supposed to look at, I believe, and I'm just paraphrasing it a bit, is don't change the character of an existing neighborhood. Well, as Bruce pointed out, on the side where my house is, it's R7200. Across the street, it's R7200. Now we're proposing to put a different development in there of a much higher density. And that, according to what I was hearing, is not quite compliant with what you're supposed to be doing. The people that own this property now, the three people that own it, whatever you give them determines the value of that property, because they're going to sell it, leave, go live someplace else, and a builder's going to take that over. So the designation that you give them determines what the value of the property is and how much they're going to get when they sell it to the builder. Now, I have understood about surface water management, et cetera, and Bruce did a good job of explaining that. But in Bothell here, we get gigantic storms every once in a while. And that retention system will fill up. Where's the overflow? When the system fills, where's the overflow? Does that mean it comes straight down to my property, and since there's nothing in between now, Ken gets flooded? I've had to rip out the sheetrock in my lower area once because it got wet in there, and that was before I did some mitigation work on my own, a French drain, etc., and repair actually my lower story inside. And whatever you do, I would hope you would keep in mind that the area that you're dealing with is surrounded by total 7,200. My proposal would be it should stay 7,200. That's the character of the neighborhood. But that's up to you guys. Thank you. My wife would like to speak next.
Thank you. Ma'am, just your name and I think we have the address, but just your name for the record.
Okay. My name is Elizabeth Eisland, and I live at 16106, 122nd Place Northeast, Bothell. What I would ask is, does everyone have the letter that I had sent on Monday with some of the photos? Those photos were taken when it wasn't raining, and if I could have taken them like this evening, it would have shown horrendous amounts of water coming, flooding into our property. One thing, I know it was stated, I don't know if it was stated by Mr. Clark or Mr. Stedman, but someone had stated something about, well, right now, it's zoned at 54D. Well, actually, less than a year ago, it was zoned at 72. So already, if we just were to go with a 54D, these property owners, there's only 3 houses right now that exist on this property. There's massive vegetation. There's a lot of trees. And those trees absorb, and that vegetation do absorb some of that water, some of the rainwater, some of the groundwater. So I just wanted to make it really clear that we're not talking, it's been 54, R54 for a long time. It hasn't. A year ago, if you look at the map that was provided, it's the Brickyard Road, Queensgate sub-area. It clearly shows the areas are 7,200. So they've already gotten an upgrade to the value of their property with them wanting to do development. Because if you compare, I don't know if you guys have the ability to put up the map that clearly shows, it doesn't show the wooded area, but it just shows the parcels. So it shows the cul-de-sac that we live in, and then it shows this parcel. If you were to compare, does somebody have that? Is that? No, it's not. I'm talking about where it doesn't show the actual home and the pieces of trees and shrubs, but it just shows the white and black for the property lines. That, the amount, even without the high power lines, that would actually, and the 7,200, that would give them approximately 10 houses. That's at 7,200. If they get the 54D, which I believe would be less dense construction, that already gives them, 13, 14 houses. Right now, again, there's only 3 residences on this property. So even if they just got to the 15 houses, that's 5 times as many houses that are already there. As far as the power lines go, I don't believe that the neighborhood or the community should be negatively impacted, because when they bought that property, I am sure that their purchase price was taken into effect by those power lines being there. I don't think the neighboring community should be affected because they bought property that was probably a better deal because of those property lines. That shouldn't affect us. And again, pushing houses away from those power lines that are off of 124th, that's going to put them even closer to us. So, again, even doing the 54D, they've already gotten an upgrade from a year ago when it was King County. It clearly shows on the maps that it was zoned for R72. So even at the 54D, they're already getting 50% more development and value possibly for their property than what they had a year ago. And just in closing, I'd just like to say that the Hallett situation, theirs is completely opposite of this situation in the sense that they don't want to develop their property. They don't want to sell it for a massive amount of money. They want to live in the home that they've lived in for years. And I believe last time she talked about it being historical value. The people in this particular parcel that we're talking about now, I don't even know how many of them. I think maybe one of them actually lives there. The others have rented it out for numerous years. Their motivation is completely different. They don't want to be in the community. They're not going to have any effect of the water. They're not going to have any effect of the development area. And if you look at the map that shows the development that's going in further down 124th by across from Kingsgate, that's a R54. Look at how small those lots are. Well, actually, look at that map if you have a chance, and look at how dense that property is. So I would just, highly recommend that you think about the fact that they've already gotten an upgrade from the 72 to the 54D. The neighbors shouldn't suffer because they bought property that was over high power lines. I'm sure they got a better deal when they bought the property. That's not our issue. Thank you so much for your time. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay. And just please take a look at the photos and the letter. Thanks.
We have them all in front of us. We really appreciate it. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to come forward at this time? Yes, ma'am. On this particular issue, the citation request in front of us right now. Yes, sir. State your name and address, and then keep your comments to 5 minutes, please.
My name is Steve Nielsen. My address is 16025 124th Avenue Northeast. It's a Woodinville address. We were part of the annexation into Bothell earlier this year. I just had a few comments that I wanted to make, but my neighbors just have some bad information. When they bought their property, our property was zoned R8 in King County. R8 has a calculable density of 11 dwelling units per acre and a design bonus density of 12 to 16 units per acre. That's what it was a year ago. We believe that's what it should be now. Yet, as someone spoke, the R4000, the Bothell R4000, we believe provides design alternatives that would allow us to achieve densities that we had before City of Bothell annexed our property, and that also provide an appropriate transition, not between single-family residential to the east or south of us, but transition from the impact of major arterials on 2 of our frontages, Northeast 160th and 124th Avenue Northeast. It's a result of land use entitlements that have been granted in Bothell, Woodinville, Kirkland, and King County. Comes through our intersection. That's a reality. And we have an opportunity for there to be a reasonable transition between that negative impact and residential development. Our neighbors do not live on a major arterial. I've lived in our home, my family, for 37 years. We raised our family there. My daughter has probably taught their children at North Shore Junior High School. She says, we're not in the community. Far cry from that. We have been active members of this community for over 3 decades, almost 4. And I wish I had a chance to have spoken earlier with our neighbors. They don't get it as far as what's going on up on our street. They just don't get it. The O'Day property is right on the corner. They've got 5-lane streets at their intersection. It's an impact that the community has created. There's a chance for transition of use. And I believe that the R4000 provides the design options that would allow us to create a reasonable residential development for that property. We're not looking for the 12 to 16 units per acre under King County bonuses. I'm sure that the property will still be developed with appropriate site planning. I'd like to encourage you to recommend an R4000 to your city council. Thank you very much.
Are there any others from the public who would like to speak to this particular issue? Okay, let's move into our own deliberations on this, and let's keep our comments as quick. Oh. Yes, sir. State your name and address for the record, please.
Jonathan Spatasian, address is 16015, and then also there's a lot on 16017.
And this is where you reside?
This is my parents' property. I'm speaking on behalf of my parents, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Okay. So when this property was purchased, my parents purchased the property in 2003. As you've already heard, there are other neighbors who purchased the property in 1979 and then 2001. The property was, as you already know, purchased under King County R8, and that was what was expected, upon purchase of property. The Kingston neighborhood was built, that she's speaking of, was built under R8 as well. And so when she's speaking about the condensed neighborhood and the surrounding lots, those were built under R8. So one thing that we also want to bring to your attention is the explosion in terms of business and population in Bothell, and the need for affordable housing. Just up the street, there are houses that are going for millions of dollars, and what we're proposing would be more affordable houses for families in Bothell. And not only that, but it has a net benefit for Bothell as well. And I don't want to speak to Bothell's strategy, but having more property and having more families in the city itself is going to increase funding to schools and parks. And so I know that you already know that, but I think there's a win-win here. In allowing, we're not asking for anything in addition to R8. We're just asking for something that's similar, and that would be the R4000. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public on this?
I just wanted to, it's Elizabeth Eisland, I just wanted to quickly correct something. He said Kingston. Well, he doesn't live there. His parents don't live there. They rent it out. It's been rental property, I believe, for approximately 10 years, so they don't even live in the community. So it's Kingsgate, not Kingston. And someone had asked, is that your residence? He didn't really answer the question. No, it's not his residence, and it's not his parents' residence. It's their rental, but they don't actually reside there.
Thank you. So I'd like to hear. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jeff O'Day, and my address is 16429 Balder Lane. I've been a Bothell resident for 14 years, and I appreciate everything Bothell's done, and I enjoy living here. So I have been a resident of Bothell, and I did purchase that property in 2001, and it was R8, and I've, for 14 years, maintained it as a rental and taken my losses as a investment property. So all of us look for a portfolio when we retire, and that's been the sole purpose of it. So having it rezoned was financially devastating. But the one thing that he just said that makes a huge difference is I live in Valhalla, and every time I leave Valhalla and take a ride and head down 100th, you've got all the developments that start in the low 800s, but really you're $900 to $1 million for any of the new homes up there. This is a chance to provide affordable housing, because my kids joke that they're never going to be able to buy a new home because they see these starting in the mid 800s, starting in the low 900s. You know, there is a need for 500,000 new homes, $500,000 new homes. And that's the only thing that I wanted to stress is I am a member of this community, and I do see how hard it is to buy a new home right now because of the pricing currently going on, because of the current land use I see around us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the deliberations part of our agenda. So again, I'd like us to kind of speak to this. Anyone who would like to, I'm not going to pressure you to speak if you don't want to, but this is your chance to do so. So would anybody like to share their thoughts on this particular issue? Commissioner Stedman.
Basically, I said it before, I'll say it again. I just have a real concern about annexing in some parcels and then changing what the actual use could be within a very short period of time. So from my perspective, I'm very willing to have it rezoned to R4000. The other thing is I do think that a development, whether it's R4000, R5400D, R5400A, will significantly improve the water issues that the neighborhood down below is saying.
Commissioner Clark.
Bruce, can I ask a couple quick questions of you, just clarification?
Yes, sir.
When the annexation took, first of all, the annexation, which of the properties around this were part of that annexation? Were the properties, was this the only property in the neighborhood that was part of that was King County and annexed into?
No, actually, all the parcels that you're looking at up on the map that's up in the...
including the...
yes, okay. Includes all those areas,
Okay,
yes.
so all of these parcels prior to the annexation were R8, is that correct?
No, actually, the parcels to the west, the R7200 that we assigned, were actually R6.
Okay, so that and that is the most comparable zone. 6 times 7,200 is about 43,000 roughly.
But the subject properties in the red were R8.
Okay, so and that's about so in the city's opinion, at the time the R5400D was the most comparable.
Equivalent, yes.
Was when you were going through the annexation, did you consider R5400A? And if not, why not? It sounds like now you're willing to do that. I'm curious to know what's changed.
Essentially what we did is we assigned a D because it was a detached, and that made the most sense. Not having a lot of information, and one of the property owners brought some of these parameters that they're dealing with, we actually took a more detailed look at the piece of property.
Dimensional requirements?
Dimensional requirements. And that's primarily where the issue is the dimensional requirements of the R5400D. And in staff's opinion, without drastically changing the density that is allowed, we thought the A made the most sense because it gives them a little bit of flexibility. And that's basically why we're making that recommendation.
Okay, so in retrospect, if you would have known what you knew about the King County zoning and the dimensional requirements at the time, is it likely you would have zoned this R5400A as opposed to D? Is that a possibility?
Boy, it's hard to say because we were trying to do these in kind of a logical analysis vision. I believe in R5400A, and that's why the staff recommendation is for that. It makes a lot of sense for this property because of the impacts associated with the, well, not just the configuration of the properties, but that easement. It just seems to be the right kind of approach, as well as, of course, our history with our 5100A within the community. We've had a lot of success with that designation.
So just doing some rudimentary mathematics, it looks to me like the R7200, if you multiply that by 6, is about R6, is that correct? I mean,
yes, that's the equivalency, yes.
And the R5400, if you multiply that by 8, is about R8, is that?
Yes.
So it seems to me that this is the way to, I mean, it seems like everybody's getting what as close as comparable to what they had before the annexation. I recognize that the request is for R4000. I'm not sure what all the details around why the proponent feel or the applicant feels like R4000 is closer, but I'm inclined to support the staff's recommendation for R5400A as opposed to R5400D based on that.
Commissioner Stahl.
Yeah, I had a few questions, Bruce, that I'd like you to weigh in on. So from the testimony, I'm hearing two things that I'm trying to reconcile. On one side, I'm hearing about to increase the density to help with traffic calming and create a transition buffer, but at the same time, the impact of increasing density. I mean, I think that would bring more traffic and more congestion. How does that work?
Well, and actually, the more dwelling units they have on the piece of property, the more traffic generation there is, given the fact that a true attached type of apartment complex has a lower average trip per day rate than a attached development. Basically what they've done, they've measured those things. And a detached single family has a tendency to have about 10 trips per day. A attached has got about 6 to 7, depend upon the makeup of the, there's different qualities of attached. So that's kind of basically how that works out as far as traffic generation goes.
I see. So switching from the 5400D to 5400A, you would expect that to reduce traffic congestion?
It'd probably be about the same, because our experience with the 5400A has been we do get detached type product. Now, one of the issues here is that there are different parameters of detached single family. There are small lot, empty nester type, and then there's the full meal deal family types, and that the International Transportation Engineers hasn't quite gotten to that degradation. We believe there's a little bit less traffic generated with the smaller detached condo type of a provision than the full single family, but it's really hard to say that.
And how would that compare to the expected traffic of a R4000?
The R4000 would have just a little bit more, just because you have a few more uses, but not a lot more traffic underneath either of these provisions. The 5400A or the R4000, you're not talking about something that's going to put this area over a certain level, basically a level of service threshold, just because of all the background traffic that occurs in this area.
And in terms of the impacts on drainage, how?
They should be exactly the same. The surface water manual that the City of Bothell has now treats any type of a development exactly the same. Therefore, they all have to be modeled as if they're 100% forested. They ought to provide for the same rate off of the piece of property. So it really doesn't matter as far as if it's R4000 or R5400A or R5400D. That will have the same surface water runoff flow controls.
Thanks.
Commissioner Cabe.
Bruce, could you expand a little bit about the character of the neighborhood? One of the earlier points brought up was 5400 is sort of out of line with properties directly adjacent to the proposed development.
Right. Well, and essentially what the City of Bothell did is that when we did the annexation, we tried to match the King County underlying zoning designation as best we could. This particular property had an R8 designation. It didn't have an R6 designation. It had an R8 designation. And that's why the City of Bothell went with our R5400 designation, because it's the closest, per acre kind of a provision. Most of the area to the west and north and east is detached single-family in the 7,200 range. The lots are varying different sizes because King County has a lot of flexibility in their lot averaging provisions, but generally it's, a 7,000 square foot lot.
Okay, thanks. And what about storm mains serving this area? Is there anything that this development will be tying into as far as, I understand that there'll be settling tanks or there'll be a detention tank, something to mitigate the stormwater, but just following up on
in fact, one of the things that'll have to happen is that they will have to analyze where they're going to place their surface water, and they have to identify how it would go. Certainly, it would not be acceptable to just to put it off to the west. That's definitely, from the testimony we received, that's certainly inadequate. So they're going to have to come up with some new type of a system, either some new pipe, take it down to 160th and route it that way, or some other mechanism that basically gets that surface water that collects and released away from impacting the folks to the west. They'd have to do them, and that's where the downstream analysis comes into play.
Commissioner Stedman.
I think my math was wrong. As I'm looking at the R8 versus the R5400, 54A or D, R8 would basically be 8 units per acre. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
Yeah. So
now again, part of the issue here is that we're talking with King County. They have a bunch of provisions that allow you to get bonus density, if you would. They have there's probably about 5 or 6 items that they say, look, yeah, you get another extra unit here, providing for this, for that's open space, affordable housing components. There's a bunch of those kind of things that we don't have in the city of Bothell.
Okay, but the basic R8,
the basic should be the same.
8 units per acre, 43,560 acres. Feet in an acre.
Right.
That's 5,400 square feet. 54 or something like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Vliet.
Yeah, so I realized that it was previously zoned R8, but when one looks at it, it appears, in actuality, it's really like 9,600 or something. It may have been zoned a different way, but currently there's only 4 residences on it. So, Bruce, you're saying that if it was rezoned to 4,000 or 5,400A, there is going to be less water runoff, surface water runoff, than there is currently today? With the 4 structures?
No. What I'm saying is that with development, when they actually tie in this facility, these properties, into an adequate storm system, they have to go through that type of analysis to make sure we don't have uncontrolled runoff. Right now, the way it is, and it's basically just 3 or 4 lots of large lot detached single family, kind of underutilized is the term we use. Basically, it says, okay, it's one single family house, but it's on a pretty good sized lot. 20,000, 25,000 square feet or something like that. That's basically the condition. Right now, I can guarantee you there are no surface water controls on that piece of property. And just based from the testimony we received from the neighbors, that there's nothing that's stopping that control from going right onto their properties.
And these stormwater catchment systems are set to be viable for how many decades once they're put in?
Well, it's a permanent feature. If you've gone by one of these sites and seen those vaults being installed, it is a major undertaking. Those things are designed incredibly stoutly, I'll call it. And I'm going to use my really true engineering techniques here, but basically they are really designed to last forever, basically.
Okay, thanks.
So, thank you all. My comments are the following. So first, I've been writing down issues that, or kind of elements of consideration that we need to have in front of us. First of all, with regards to water, it is an issue in our area. We're experiencing it today. In fact, just these dramatic water, rainfall that we receive, and so the management of both stormwater and surface water is critical. It's my belief that actually with development, because there's no surface water management today, I think that actually the downstream prospects for these property owners could improve with development. We also have to look at the future strategy of Bothell and the city of Bothell, as well as that particular neighborhood, which is probably the most important, and the traffic considerations and what is the right use for this property. We've heard from homeowners, some who would like to have the zoning increased to 7,200, and others that would like to have it reduced to 4,000. So we've heard from a variety of requests on that regard. We've looked at density, we've looked at housing capacity. So having put all that in place, the R5400A designation provides flexibility. This is a piece of property that needs some flexibility with the power lines and the various other, the fall off to the west, as well as just other considerations of this property. We need to provide the property owners with some flexibility for how they would design and develop, and I believe the R5400A would do that. So at this point, I'd like to hear a motion to consider the staff recommendation, and that would be the recommended motion move to adopt the staff findings, conclusions, and recommendations as Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations.
I'll try the motion. I'd like to make a motion to amend the plan designation and zoning classification of R5400D to R5400A.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
So let's move forward with our agenda to the first review of the initial review of the Country Village Lake Pleasant SR 527 corridor sub-area plan.
Oops. Yes, this is also part of our 2015 periodic update, and this is involving the Country Village Lake Pleasant SR 527 corridor sub-area, which is located kind of in the middle of the city, and of course, as the name would suggest, has the Country Village Shopping Center and the Lake Pleasant RV Park, as well as some other properties. Essentially what we have is this area right here has been identified, and the Country Village Shopping Center is right here. But this area right here has been identified for the area by the city as one potential area where we could catch up on our population growth capacity deficit. And as I know that we're about 3,500 people short of meeting our target capacity for the city of Bothell and our Snohomish County half of the community. And essentially what's happened is that we had a little discussion with the council as well, as there's a couple areas that make a lot of sense to target to meet that, to erase that capacity deficit, one of which is within the Country Village area. The other, of course, is the Canyon Park, which we'll get to a little bit later on this following month. And essentially what this is the area that we're looking at is outlined in red here and includes the Country Village Shopping Center, a couple properties to the north, and some properties to the south, including an existing condominium facility that's probably built out to its maximum provision. And essentially what this would do is this would add an RAC, or Residential Activity Center, to this location, as well as expand what we call the Red Barn Special District. And the Red Barn Special District covers an area right around this location. I'm going to kind of point it out right here. It includes the Safeway development, a couple properties to the south, there's my arrow, as well as stops at 240th. So it really only covers this area. Our proposal is to expand that, and the reason for that is because the Red Barn Village Special District has some interesting design parameters that make a lot of sense here, and that's one of the things that when you look at the improvements in the area of, the Grease Monkey facility, it looks really different. The Safeway had a lot of provisions, a lot of architectural features that were added to it to make it work in with the community. We would like to expand those to the north to include this location. And one of the provisions that we've, sorry about that. One of the things we've spoken with, I want to go to this map here, it's a little bit better, is that the areas to the south we want to include as well. And this along 240th Street is just a row of detached single family right now. But it would be comparable to have the RAC there to allow them to do some townhouses and stuff like that. Right across the street is their shopping center that's basically a Safeway. Buffalo River Highway is a very major arterial. It's also got a lot of transit on it. So there's a lot of provisions that make this sense to have an RAC designation here on this piece of property. So that's basically our recommendation in a quickie, and we'd like to again do the public testimony any questions you have. This is, of course, the initial review. We are going to go out in the next week and have the full, public notice sent out to all the people within 300 feet and everybody within there. So our next hearing, which will be on January the 14th, you'll probably have a lot more people in the room. But that's basically when we'll do it next. But if you have any initial thoughts or suggestions, that'd be good. One of the things that you saw within our staff analysis, we were playing around with some ideas about maybe some type of special architectural thing that would recognize the country village, kind of the uniqueness of the country village. And I had a chance to talk to a representative of the owner a couple of days ago, and they said, well, that's okay, but we realize that these were facilities that were designed with a very specific purpose in mind. We don't think it's really be very easy to take those and move those or something like that. And there's nothing in historic on the area. So when you get the staff recommendation next time, we may modify that quite a bit, because it after the discussion, it maybe doesn't make as much sense as we thought it was initially when we were thinking about it. But I'd like to hear your comments on that as well as comments from the public.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Blackburn? Commissioner Vliet?
I guess firstly, why are notifications sent out after the first review instead of prior to?
Yeah, provided with consistent with our procedures, the initial review is when we may get a brand new applicant or some new property owner who wants to do a comp plan change or something like that. So what we're doing is we're taking advantage of the initial review so the commission can say, yeah, look at this individual property owner amendment request and we'll go with that. And then we can do the public notification. We hate doing public notification twice because we have found that people come back and say, well, I was really confused. I got this notice and then I got another notice, but there's something different about it. So we want to make sure we have all the hens in the hand, essentially, that says, okay, we know all of the provisions that are going to be looked at, the different properties are going to be looked at. So that's why we do it this way.
Any other questions? Commissioner Clark.
Bruce, it looks to me like, just comparing the zoning map and the outline of the sub area, that part of what you're suggesting be changed.
Thank you.
Part of what you're suggesting be changed to CB is in a different sub area and also a zone 9600. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, one of the things that we probably do is that when we actually get into the actual mapping, we're probably going to expand the country village sub-area to include those pieces of properties. Right now, a lot of them are within the Shelton View. So basically, that'll make it a lot cleaner that we can do the expanded Red Barn Village to include those pieces of property.
What's the process for moving property from one sub-area to another? Is it it's what we're doing
a line
now?
On the map.
Okay. But I mean, it requires a comprehensive plan amendment?
Oh, yes, absolutely,
okay.
Yes.
But nothing, no other public, no hearing or anything like that to do that? Okay.
Well, we are actually doing that tonight.
I mean, it seems like a separate issue, though, to change the boundary line, because I didn't see that addressed in here.
Yeah, and we didn't really get into that too much, but, and again, in hindsight, we kind of wish we'd thrown a little bit more into that analysis. I was working on some other things that particular week.
So that's something that you might be able to expand
absolutely,
upon.
Yeah. We will give that a real clear subheading within your next packet.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? So I had one question of you. What is the, I mean, you might have mentioned this in your comments just to clarify. So the current property owner of Country Village, have you gotten any feedback from them on the proposed changes?
Not other than from their representative who came in and spoke with us a little bit about it. And I don't want to put words in their mouth because I think they're here tonight. But the idea behind it is that I can tell you that the owners have approached the city for many, many years about the possibility of having some kind of a residential component to their area. It has always kind of made some sense, but it's just never been the right time.
Great. All right. Thank you. So we'd like to, again, open this up to the public for any testimony or comment with regards to this particular issue on the Country Village, Lake Pleasant, SR 527 corridor, particularly with what the consideration is around the Country Village shopping center. So are there any members of the public in the room that would like to speak to this issue at this time? Yes, ma'am.
My name is is Wendy Fry, and I'm a representative for Jim and Lori Jorgensen. They live at 724 232nd Street, Southeast Bothell. And
So Wendy Fry?
Yes.
And you represent, say that again, you represent?
Jim and Lori Jorgensen. And
Are
they
you,
reside at
how do you, in what capacity do you represent?
I'm project manager, not developer.
All right.
So,
Thank you.
and I apologize. Bruce and I had been in contact with each other, and I was supposed to get him a package, which I did email to him, but apparently to the wrong email. And you'll get another duplicate of that, Bruce. That wasn't your fault. And I left the country, just got back in town this morning, and realized it hadn't been delivered to him. So, what the question is we have
Make sure I understand. So there was a packet of information from you that was for staff?
exactly, yeah, for rezoning on Jim and Lori's property.
Okay, and this is with regards to the Country Village parcel?
Exactly. They're actually, their parcel is half in Country Village and half in Shelton View. And so it's zoned 9,600 in the Shelton View and 5,400 in the Country Village.
So
what
do
they're trying
you
to-
have some exhibit you want to give to staff at this point?
Yes, and I just wanted to get on public record tonight, since we are dealing with Country Village. And I apologize once again for breaking protocol. I just, as I said, I wanted to get it at least on the record that they're requesting a rezoning on their piece of property.
Okay.
Okay? So
All
I'll
right.
give him the information, and then I apologize once again.
All right.
My bad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment, again, specific to the Country Village parcel? Yes, sir.
Actually, before we get too
Yep,
much
sorry.
further, could I have Ms. Fry submit that to me now? And
Yeah,
I'll give it
if you have this exhibit, this is the time
Yes.
for you to leave this with staff. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Brian Lovelace. I'm one of the owners of Country Village. Our property is at 23718 Bothell Everett Highway Southeast, and our offices are in Suite H. I've been kind of elected. I think they asked for volunteers in my family, and everybody else took one step back, and I stood there like one of the Three Stooges. So here I am.
You're the
So, first off, I want to commend all you guys. I am a realtor, and I've been to lots of planning meetings over the years. Every time I go, I think, God, the service you guys are providing for the community is, I don't know that I could do it. So, but it's very impressive, and I appreciate all the time and effort you guys are putting into this, because everybody's property is very important to them, and there's so many impacts for so many people that, anyway, I commend you on that. We first bought property there. My father first bought property there in 1979 in that location. We opened our first retail shop there in 1981. In those days, it was Snohomish County, and unincorporated Snohomish County, I believe. And it was kind of an American story. We didn't really have a master plan. My dad was somewhat of a cowboy, so we just started putting in shops, and slowly it developed. There were varying levels of public support and non-support in those days. There were plenty of people that were not in favor of Country Village. Over the years, I think that's softened. I think there's a lot more proponents now than detractors, probably. We've tried to be a positive participant in the city since then, and my sister, who's the manager of Country Village, has been a member of the chamber, or is a member of the Chamber of Commerce, or we all are. And in fact, the Chamber of Commerce offices are there. My sister's also done time on the Tax Advisory Committee for 5 years, and now my daughter-in-law, Katie Lovelace, is on it. We've done a lot of work on the Sign Code Committee. We've given free booths to the City of Bothell at our farmers market to promote sustainable Bothell, and for the annexation, actually, which happened in 1992. We were annexed into the City of Bothell. We support the RAC or potential RAC rezone for there's a number of reasons, actually, but we haven't reviewed the proposal in serious detail yet, because we just got it Friday. So I'm just going to speak briefly to it now, and I assume that you're going to get to see more of me in January. But we did pay to have a stoplight. We paid a significant amount of money for that stoplight at the north side of Country Village. We felt it was a serious safety issue, one, but also with the idea of it being able to be redeveloped or some additional development. We own 13 acres there total. 6 of them, the westerly 6, is primarily undeveloped. We have some storage buildings back there. Other than that, there really isn't a lot of development there. We haven't ever been able to develop it into retail or anything else. It's too far back from the highway to be viable retail. It just doesn't make any sense. And we've been asking the city for many, many years to give us some sort of retail or residential component. CB was an old Snohomish County zoning. We inherited that, or the city of Bothell inherited that with our property. It doesn't have a provision in the city of Bothell to build any residential use there. We have always felt that it would be a positive transition from what is essentially currently straight retail at the east end of the village. We abut single family on the west end, and we have this kind of no man's land in the middle. We think that RAC would allow for a cohesive transition. Also, and some of the other people tonight have testified to this effect, I'm a realtor and I have been for 31 years, and I sell a lot of single family houses. There's virtually no affordable housing in the vicinity of new construction. Even the stuff in is it Saratoga, I think it's called, just that stuff's all 700, you know. What if this zoning is allowed to happen, I believe you're going to see housing that's more in that under 500 market, which is just a market that's really missing in the city. Of course, we also have, as Bruce has spoken to, and I know you guys are aware, we have GMA requirements that are not being met and not even close, and I think this would significantly help with that. There are a couple of things I just noticed in glancing through the City of Bothell's statement that they brought out on Friday. They've taught, and I think Bruce spoke to this a little bit, they're talking about having a lot of design control and duplicating features of Country Village. I understand that there needs to be certainly some design controls for any development. I would argue that this recent Safeway development is, and I actually, Safeway, I was a listing agent when Safeway bought that property. I also happened to be the listing agent when Grease Monkey bought theirs. Those are both great developments. I think they're an example of modern development that can take place and still fit into the neighborhood. And I would tell you that that would be the one area of concern that kind of comes up to me as a red flag would be if there's just too many restrictions placed on our property. You know, I think that the RAC zoning is going to allow some flexibility. Moving forward, I think it's consistent with where development is going. I also think it really furthers the stated goals and vision of neighborhood Bothell and the neighborhood village concept. We already have a really pedestrian-friendly development and commercial development or retail development. I think adding housing behind it or a mixed use or whatever makes total sense from a standpoint of helping to sustain Country Village, and at the same time it's very pedestrian friendly. You know, you have major transit corridors right there. I just think it fits so much of the criteria that's kind of what's outlined in the growth. Anyway, I know this is early on in the process. I just want to go on record. Hope you guys seriously consider this. My sister did write a letter because I told her she had to do that if I was speaking. So she wrote a letter. I brought copies for each one of you. I will give it to Bruce so he can further that on to you. And I really appreciate all your time tonight.
So,
thanks, guys.
yeah, please submit that letter as an exhibit, and then if you wouldn't mind staying, there might be a couple of questions for you.
No problem.
So I'll start off, and there may be others, but Country Village has been a tremendous asset for the city of Bothell for as long as I can remember, 25, 30 years, in a time when our city did not have, I've always felt that Bothell's underdeveloped in the way of retail options for its citizens. We've got some other aspects of Bothell that were tremendously developed. But having said that, we want to position Country Village for the future. And so the consideration, that was what, I know that this has been somewhat, at least as I understood, driven by staff, and I wanted to make sure that the property owner was on board with this, and I'm glad to hear that you are. I hear your point with regards to design controls, and we will do our best to kind of provide both flexibility for the developer and the owner, and also, just to keep the character of the city. I have one question for you, and and that is just a little bit on the sales performance of Country Village as you move back from the highway. My guess is that your better performing businesses are closer to the highway, and that as you move back, it's just more difficult for customers to find the locations back there. And yet, as I think about that property, that's as you get further and further west, it would be ideal residential. And I haven't really looked at the characteristics of the land, and I don't know what if there's any that's unbuildable due to water issues or whatever. But I just think that there's a real possibility for some tremendous, here you'd be so super conveniently located, and yet have quiet privacy away from the highway. So those are my thoughts as I've looked at that parcel. So I didn't really have a question in there. I guess I've kind of rambled, but maybe a little bit of comment on the performance of the businesses closest to the highway versus those further back.
Well, and there's no question, part of this is traffic-based as well. Now that we've had our front entrance rearranged, because we've kind of lost the access in and out of the south entrance, which really was our primary entrance, and now it's become more our north entrance, that has had some effect. But for sure, the upper level, the second floor spaces at Country Village have always been really tough for retail shops to pull off. We've only been able to get office use into those, and even that's been tougher, certainly, because there's parking issues. There's a whole lot of reasons offices have a tough time with that space. And so I've always felt that other than the ground floor, some sort of a mixed use. And mixed use was a real hard sell 30 years ago, but it's become, as you look around, it's really become the cutting edge and the way of the world. And I think it just dovetails so beautifully. And that's one of the things that's so important with the RAC is where you'd be allowing for that to happen. And there are portions of the village that the buildings are pretty substandard and probably at some point in time merit some redevelopment. I would assume that it's likely that they would keep the retail character and try to keep a lot of the character. But I think that being able to transition possibly to some second floor or third floor housing above that retail would make a lot of sense. And for sure, the transportation component here is huge because of all of the transit that's planned and that's already exists, and the state highway expanding, and all the sidewalks, and we even have trails that run back towards Safeway. It's a real natural for pedestrian-friendly development. And I also think that west end, allowing that to be residential, or a little bit denser residential than further west, but at least it's a really beautiful transition from the village, and actually will be a great buffer from a standpoint of it just won't ever be very intensive retail because it just doesn't make fiscal sense.
Great. Yeah, and I might also add that it addresses our increased capacity need in Snohomish County, and I think it also strategically supports this idea of these kind of pockets of density throughout our city that are concentrated areas. So those are my comments. Are there any other comments or questions of Mr. Lovelace? Commissioner Clark.
I don't have a question, Mr. Lovelace, but I do. Bruce.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.
You can stay there if you want, because others may have questions.
I think we may have another. We may have a couple of questions. If you wouldn't mind just standing by, we might have another question or two for you.
Bruce, is there is no residential component in the community business designation?
That's correct. Yes. And
what is the transition requirement between community business and the residential, say the 9600 to the west?
And this is actually, that's a good question, because right now there's a provision that has a 100-foot building setback plus a 30-foot landscape easement. And one of the provisions you're going to see there, staff is thinking that it's time to get rid of that 100-foot setback from the west property line. That was set in actually 1994, the initial comprehensive plan. The properties to the west are designated R40,000. Now there are 9,600. They're being built upon. There's lots of development happening there. We're not sure that we need that 100-foot setback to the buildings. We think the 30-foot buffer still is appropriate. And the model is what was established behind the Safeway project, which has become a very successful sight and sound buffer from that facility. And certainly there's still some light pollution that gets through here and there, a little bit of noise, but we think that is the appropriate buffer to put there and not have that 100-foot building setback.
Is the buffer behind Safeway a 30-foot landscape buffer?
It is a 30-foot landscape buffer.
And right now, is it a total of 130 feet, or does that 30 feet overlap the 100-foot?
It is 100 feet with 30 feet within that 100 feet. So it's 100 foot and then 30 feet within that.
And if it so community business is 100 feet, RAC is also currently 100 feet, and
and here's what we're proposing. We are proposing not to have that 100-foot.
Okay, so that's going to be part of the
yes.
Is that a zoning? Is that a change to the RAC zone overall, or is it just in this sub area?
It's just within this sub area.
Okay, all right. Thank you,
Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I might hold Mr. Levis. Thanks for coming to speak tonight. I think I personally think I just spent a couple hours just walking around Country Village today. I kind of consider it probably the gem of Bothell. I love Main Street. It's fantastic. I do really like Country Village. It's interesting to hear the story about how it happened. A big thanks to your dad for that. I mean, it's just very interesting. It's really hard to recreate, and I guess my hope would be as the site gets redeveloped, is that you try to retain as much about the character as you can. I mean, you got roosters walking around, you have train cars scattered throughout the property, you got all these little places to sit and walk around. It's really neat, and one thing I also noticed today, I can speak for the second floor because I didn't go to as far as I could tell, every single one of the bottom floor businesses was occupied. And I think it's pretty hard if you go around to places, strip malls, these new strip malls were built in the 80s, and you're going to see a couple storefronts where, it's just vacant. And it's really vibrant. I know it's maybe especially vibrant this time of year with the holidays, but it's just a great place. And I hope as we go forward, and I'll maybe speak more to this next time when there's more people from the community here, but I hope we can really retain some of those things that make it such a great place.
So if I could speak for just a second, the one thing that you have going for you in that wish is all of the water courses that run through the village are going to make it really tough for someone to come in there and essentially knock it over and redevelop. There would be some serious mitigation issues. So that's kind of a natural preventive to that, and makes it unlikely. The 100-foot buffer, I'll speak just briefly to that. In 1994, there was, and we'll see next meeting what the community's like now, but in 1994, at the initial comp, I was at a lot of those meetings. There was huge public outcry, and there were a lot of that were 1 acre zoned properties on 3rd Avenue that came and were really vehemently opposed to Country Village at all. And that 100-foot was a really large buffer that was kind of spot zoned on us. It wasn't really applied throughout the rest of the city of Bothell. And we've always felt that was a really harsh punishment, if you will. But so I would tell you that Safeway is a more intensive commercial development with big lights, a lot of noise, and all those things. What we're proposing in the back probably is going to be a primarily residential component if we get this zoning. Not going to be nearly the impact that Safeway is, and they have the 30-foot buffer. And so we really support that reduction to 30 feet and the elimination of that 100 feet. I think that's a huge portion of this proposal. So thank you, though. I appreciate it.
Any other questions of Mr. Lovelace? All right, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Commission. Name is Sandy Gwynn, 19010 88th Place Northeast, Bothell, Washington. I normally don't have the pleasure to be able to come down and comment before you because I do work on Wednesday nights. Tonight I was relieved from that. And I was watching you discuss this sub-area, and I went to the city's website trying to rapidly find the information. Couldn't find it, figured I'll come down here, there'll be a packet out in the lobby as a reference. There's no packet out there. I typically do work for the Planning Commission, and we will typically have 3 or 4 packets as reference copies for citizens who are coming in. They can see what you are talking about. So I would really recommend that, and I'm really glad there's going to be a mailing, because as Mr. Lovelace spoke, it has changed the character. I don't think you're going to see as many people opposing the change or changes. You may have a couple of concerns, and I haven't had a chance to look at your analysis, but I do know that that is a lot of wetlands in there. And in one of your prior amendments you were talking about, what struck me is if the water normally drains down and it's now going to be captured, is it going to leave holes in the ground for sinkholes to be formed? I mean, I would hope the city would look at that type of analysis, because as it gets more crowded and we're required to put more density in our city, we really have to be smart about it. And I don't necessarily think this might be the right area for that. I absolutely love Country Village. I know Luann personally. I would hope also that recognizing the residential character and the transition from one residential character to another, that you put some thought into that. And the other one that struck me was transportation. If this is to be developed, where would that road go? Now, you have a lot of wetlands here, so are you going to be degrading some wetlands for the road? The council is just grappling with, what was it, the Fitzgerald sub-area, and taking the road off because there'd be more damage to the wetland. So I like to have some consistency applied with regulations. And I will hopefully be able to comment when I find the analysis on there. And just one other thing, I was briefly watching the last meeting, and you added some properties. Was that added to the annual docket, or was it added to the 2015 comp plan update?
Which properties are you referring to?
Again, I was channel hopping, and I was kind of surprised. You took a vote at the last meeting, so I don't think that was the only vote you took that night, I believe, to add properties, so you would know the properties better than I would.
I don't know. Bruce, do you remember which properties?
Yeah, I believe what Ms. Gwynn is speaking to is the property owners who approached the city as part of the 2015 comprehensive plan update, who have said, look, we would like to have our property considered, just like we had this evening from for the the request we just received, and it is part of the 2015 comprehensive plan update.
Was there a notice given to the public at large that additions could be considered to that extended date?
Yeah, we've had that discussion multiple times on for our allotted provisions. A specific notice, no, but what's happened is that all the notice that we've provided through the Imagine Bothell and those kind of things have been occurring as we've been going along.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
No, I just comment. First of all, your point about the packet or agenda for this evening, it as a matter of process is on the city's website, and we do have a number of them in paper form, but we had to have had quite a large number of attendees, so it's possible that they got picked up prior to you. I don't know how if you got here first or not, but
not first.
Okay, so and I just know, I don't know how many we have in paper form. We have to be careful of just not printing too many that don't get used, but I know there was some number here this evening, weren't there, Bruce?
Yeah, I believe there were 7 extra copies.
Yeah,
left.
so we definitely, to your first point, do all we can, both paper and electronic, to notify the agenda out to the city.
Maybe with the next mailing, there might be more people here, so maybe some extra copies would be beneficial.
Yeah, okay.
And if the website, you have the agenda, but I was looking for the sub-area, because the comp plan is listed by their main elements and their sub-area. And that's what I was logically looking for, was something to compare
Sure.
it in that manner.
Well, as we've gone through this plan, and like we're working on 2 sub-areas this evening, the packet includes 3 maps of each sub-area with as well as a written description of the sub-area in it.
Yeah.
So
I was just looking for the actual text. I can go back to the main elements and see what's in there.
Sure.
And then go to the sub-areas, and it's the comprehensive look that I was looking for that I couldn't find.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. At this point, if you wouldn't mind, Bruce, putting that slide. Are there any other public comments? I don't want to close this off to anybody. Okay, seeing none, if you could put that slide back up that you had in terms of your kind of proposed steps for this particular sub area, and you had a requested motion. So really, this motion is to continue this plan, and specific to the Country Village Lake Pleasant corridor. You're proposing that we continue the overall hearing to next week, but
Right.
that this particular second review on this sub-area to January 14th.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So it's a
Can we-
fairly easy one this one tonight.
Any comments with regards to the recommended motion from staff? Commissioner Vliet.
Well, the only question I have, and I was thinking ahead to the 14th, is so we have that and a couple other, we have another initial review that day. I just haven't been on the commission long enough to know how long it would take, but I suspect that second review of the Country Village sub area is going to take quite a bit of time, and it's going to have quite a bit of interest, but that could be incorrect. And I didn't know if we need to juggle anything around or just keep it as it is.
Well, you're right. This one's going to take some time. Some of them have been quicker than others. The other 2 items on the agenda for the 14th are initial reviews, which I think could happen fairly rapidly. We're not going to probably make any final decisions for the other 2. So my feeling right now is I think we're good for the 14th. Any other questions with regards to the motion?
I have a question.
Mr. Clark.
The other 2 that are going to go through the initial review there, Bruce, are there comprehensive plan proposals from the public in either one of those? There are not.
On
Okay.
either one. That's
I
correct.
think that will certainly speed it up as well. All right. Thank you.
So, Commissioner Stahl.
Well, I'm ready for
Ready?
the motion.
All right, great.
So if I can get this right. So I move to continue the overall 2015 periodic plan to next week, it'd be December 17th, and that we will continue the discussion specifically on tonight's topics for Country Village, Lake Pleasant, SR 527 corridor to January 14th, 2015.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So with that motion, we are ready to move forward in our agenda. We don't have any study session, old business. Any other reports from staff?
No, we have none this evening.
All right. Reports. Any other reports from members? We're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
We are adjourned.
Thank you.